Less than 2 weeks ago, the US Treasury intervened to defend Japan's currency, the yen, spending billions of euros buying up yen on the foreign exchange market. Originally, it looked like the intervention had sort of worked. The yen strengthened from 164 to the dollar to 156, and didn't move all that much in the week after. However, in the past couple of days, its decline has restarted. So in this video, we're going to explain why the yen is still falling, and whether the intervention has already failed. We believe that for the news to be trustworthy, it must be produced free from the influence of those we cover or who fund us. That's why we have a strict funding policy that keeps sponsors at an arm's length. Find out more about what we believe in our official manifesto. It's linked in the description of every one of our videos. So this story starts with the yen, which has basically been declining since 2022, when it slipped from about 110 to the dollar to more like 150. It then hovered there for the next couple of years, with the Japanese government intervening to make sure it never really fell below 160. The yen's decline probably has something to do with inflation, which averaged about zero in Japan between 1990 and 2020, but returned with a vengeance in 2022. Inflation obviously erodes the real value of the yen, which has undermined its appeal as a so-called safe haven. The usual remedy to persistent inflation and a weak currency is higher interest rates, which reduce the money supply, hence less inflation, and make it more attractive to save in that currency, hence a stronger currency. Unfortunately, raising interest rates is difficult for Japan because higher interest rates mean higher borrowing costs, and this is a real problem for the Japanese government because of its massive debt burden, not to mention the fact that their borrowing costs are already skyrocketing. This is probably the main reason that Japan's central bank, the Bank of Japan or BOJ, hasn't raised interest rates as quickly as you might expect, and has basically the lowest rates in the world. This has put further downward pressure on the yen because it's made it more attractive to save cash in other currencies like euros or dollars. Anyway, this all came to a head a couple of weeks ago, when, after a series of expensive but ultimately futile interventions, the yen finally slipped past 160, reaching a low of about 164 the week before last. And this, or more specifically the Friday before last, is when the US Treasury decided to intervene to prop the yen back up, in coordination with the Japanese Ministry of Finance or MOF. In practice, this meant the Treasury and the Japanese MOF buying up billions of yen on the markets with other currencies to make it stronger on foreign exchange. Interestingly, the US didn't intervene with dollars, they actually intervened with euros. No one knows exactly how much the US spent, but the total intervention came to about $50 billion, and the US has about 26 billion euros in its foreign exchange reserves, so it's plausible to imagine it came to the tens of billions. So why did the US spend billions of euros bailing out Japan? Well, it's in part because Trump doesn't like the fact that Japan runs a trade deficit with the US, and has long argued that a weak yen exacerbates this problem by making Japanese exports cheaper in the US, and by making American exports more expensive in Japan. But the main reason, which we embarrassingly overlooked in our last video on this topic, is that Trump, or rather his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, didn't want Japan to sell its US assets. For context, the Japanese state is sitting on trillions of dollars worth of American assets, including US equities and, perhaps more importantly, loads of US government bonds, commonly known as treasuries. When the yen is falling against the dollar, the natural thing for Japan to do is sell some of these assets for dollars, and then use these dollars to defend the yen on the currency markets. Bessent's intervention suggests he really didn't want Japan to sell these assets, and was presumably particularly worried about any sell-off in treasuries, given that US bond yields are already high and rising. Now, originally the intervention looked like it had sort of worked. The yen fell back down to about 156 to the dollar, and closed out last week at about 157. However, it's since continued its decline, and at the time of writing is above 159, flirting with the all-important 160 threshold. Moreover, using the dollar as a benchmark understates how badly the yen is doing, because the dollar itself has also been declining recently, falling by nearly 2% against the euro in the past 2 weeks. This is largely due to a terrible jobs report at the end of last week, which led to a sell-off in the dollar, and was the only reason that the yen was able to close out last week at 157. So, why is the yen declining again? Well, the success of this intervention was always going to depend on credibility. In other words, whether markets actually believed that the US and Japan were genuinely committed to defending the yen. Think about it. If you genuinely believe the yen is going to hold below 160, you won't sell, because your asset now has a stable value. If, however, you think that Japan and the US don't actually have the stomach to stem the decline, you'll sell, in anticipation of further declines in the future. The basic problem with the intervention was that it did not bestow the required credibility, for at least 3 reasons. First, the mere fact that the US intervened suggests that Japan was simply unwilling to sell off the proverbial family silver in its massive pile of foreign assets, which it could have used to defend the yen by itself. Second, the fact that the US intervened with euros instead of dollars suggests its support for the yen is conditional and limited. Trump apparently doesn't want to be seen to be giving away dollars, and the US only has very limited foreign exchange reserves anyway. Third, it was later reported that the intervention blindsided the European Central Bank, even though it was done with euros. This also spooked markets, because it implied that not everyone is on board with this strong yen policy, and that Besant's intervention was somewhat ad hoc. For context, these sorts of interventions are usually coordinated with other major monetary authorities, which is what gives the market peace of mind that they're going to stick. As a final thing, as well as being not great for Japan, this intervention, and its apparent failure, could also be not great for the US. This is essentially because Besant has signalled 2 things to the market here. First, that he's worried about the state of the Treasury market, and by implication America's fiscal position, and second, that he doesn't want people to sell the Treasuries they hold in their reserves. But this is exactly why people hold Treasuries in the first place. They're supposed to be the most liquid asset around, one that you know you can always sell. If this is no longer the case, Treasuries will quickly lose their appeal as a reserve asset. Now, this story about the initial US intervention to save the yen is constantly updating as more and more outlets are reporting on it, so it might feel like it's hard to keep up with the ever-changing media landscape. Right now, there are 418 sources currently reporting on it, with most of the coverage coming from the centre. This type of analysis is why Ground News has been our favourite way to stay up to date with the news since 2023. It's no secret by this point just how much we're fans of Ground News. They've been long-time supporters of this channel and independent news media at large, and truly help us understand the political climate better. For example, without Ground News, we wouldn't be able to easily compare the headlines for this story on the US intervention in the yen, and see that the left mentions that concern for the US economy drove the intervention, and the right focuses on the joint nature of the US and Japanese action. Ground News not only gives you an easy way to digest the news, but it also offers a comprehensive breakdown into the ownership, bias distribution, and factuality of each article, allowing you to dive even deeper. If you're worried about how much you can trust what's being said about a specific story, with a click of a button you can filter and sort every story by their factuality level, helping you to easily grasp the reliability of each outlet. And with their blind spot feed, you're able to see everything you might not normally stumble across, both local and international, keeping you fully informed even outside of your media bubble. Ground News is completely algorithm free, so you're never forced into a narrative or told how or what to think. That's why we're partnering with them to offer you 40% off their Unlimited Access Vantage plan. All you have to do is subscribe through the link in the description, go to ground.news/TLDR or scan the QR code on screen, and you'll be supporting an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.